We are starting to read A Royal Duty by Paul Burrell, a book that the royal family tried to suppress massively. They brought a £1.5 million court case against Burrell, claiming that he stole over 300 personal items from Princess Diana, when in fact they were willingly given to him by family members or the household staff, or the Queen gave him permission to take. Now, before we get too deep into this book, I know that Burrell is kind of a controversial figure. He became a reality TV star, and people claim that he's, exploiting Diana's legacy, and I think those are all fair criticisms. But since the royal family was so mad about the contents of this book, enough to feed PR about their anger to royal biographers and royal journalists and royal correspondents, etc., I think we have to read it. Paul Burrell describes growing up in a working-class mining town in a pretty average, working-class British household. His parents married young, probably too young, and they were dealing with their own traumas. He talks about how his mother was dealing with the trauma of losing her own mother, and they struggled a lot financially growing up. Thankfully, a teacher advocated for Paul Burrell to go to a pretty fancy secondary school, which allowed him to pursue a degree. He said learning about history is what got him interested in the royal family in the first place, which I think a lot of people can relate to. It kick-started my fascination with royalty and heritage, going back to the Norman conquest of 1066. When other boys played out after school, I stayed in and completed my homework, which Kim would copy on the bus next day. When I had finished, I remained at the desk in my bedroom and read book after book about kings and queens. I went on to pass English Literature O-level with an essay on Richard III, much maligned, misunderstood, and wrongly portrayed as a hunchback, twisted and wicked man. In truth, he was courageous and passionate in his reign, which lasted just 2 years. It should have taught me that members of the royal family whose faces don't fit can be cruelly judged by history. Around the time of his graduation from catering college, he starts applying for some low entry level jobs. He had worked in hotel management basically, so he was starting to look for other places where he could apply his skills. And 2 places that he applied to was one working on the QE2, which is a big boat, and the second one was working at Buckingham Palace. When he has the interview, they ask him, quote, "Do you always sit down before you are asked?" said Mr. Timms in an officious, pompous manner. "Do you respect your seniors?" "Of course I do." "Then why don't you address them as sir?" Despite this red flag of an interview, they finally do reach out to him again. He gets accepted by both the QE2 and by Buckingham Palace, but his mother burns the letter from the QE2 because she thinks working at Buckingham Palace would be, quote, a dream job. I can't fault his mother for thinking in this way. But let's step back from the glitz and glamour of the monarchy. This is a job at a government office. This is a job at a firm that is shrouded in secrecy, that nobody knows anything about. It just speaks to how British people are conditioned to believe that the palace must be a magical place, a dream offer. But we don't stop to think, maybe this is just a normal workplace with normal workplace problems, but now it also has this mystical, religious, hierarchical aspect to it as well. A religious overtone where your bosses are supposedly touched by the divine. Not to mention that they are entrenched in the government and media landscape. But I'm sure all these red flags are fine. Let's just ignore them for now, I guess. The first thing that struck me is that Burrell's uniform is 200 years old. It was pantomime season. Staring back at me was a reflection from the past, a stranger dressed in royal livery, as if he was about to serve King George III, not Queen Elizabeth II. A navy blue velvet riding cap, a white starched ruff frilled out round the neck over a collarless shirt, a black embroidered waistcoat with gold threaded stripes and a plain silk back, fastened tight in the front with gold buttons embossed with the royal crest, red coarse velvet breeches tied below the knee with gold buttons and a tassel, pink silk stockings and black patent leather buckled pumps. At my left side hung a sword and scabbard. I slipped on white cotton gloves. For a few minutes, I felt silly, then a huge sense of pride that I pulled on the final piece to complete the full state livery, a scarlet tailcoat with the thick gold edges running down the button front and gold hoops around each arm. It was a uniform that had been handed down over at least 200 years, repaired, stitched, and musty, but with a magnificence that hadn't faded over time. You think they would upgrade the uniforms of their staff in 200 years? with the millions and millions of pounds that they have, but of course they don't care about workers' rights. So Burrell describes that pretty quickly he learns that servants are not meant to be seen at all. I think I knew this instinctively from watching like Downton Abbey, but that took place in the early 20th century. This is in the late 1970s. The art of being a good servant, I learned, was to perform as many of my duties as possible without being seen. A servant's life is spent in the shadows, and at best, he or she should be invisible. At its most extreme, this requirement led a scurrying army of maids or footmen to hide until the coast was clear. At Sandringham House, maids would dart into a walk-in cupboard under the stairs so as not to be seen when the Queen was coming down into the main hall. This hide without seek led to many bizarre situations as staff lurked behind a closed door of a back passageway leading to a bedroom, ear pressed to the door to listen for a quiet that signaled it was safe to proceed. From a shadowy recess, staff watched a drawing room and the last guest had left, then cleared empty glasses, stoked the fire, plumped the cushions, and brushed up the carpet. We also get a glimpse that the hierarchy of the institution does not just extend with the royal family itself, but into its staff. When it came down to snobbery, I found there were more noses stuck in the air in the royal household than in the royal family. There was a pecking order in everything, down to something as simple as staff mealtimes. It was a class system, straight from the decks of the Titanic, encouraged by the hierarchical household masters, whom the Princess of Wales referred to as the men in gray suits. The most senior staff members are treated in a much better way and get much finer amenities than other staff members. We see here that where the creme de la creme of the household staff eats is in a dining room that's 4 times bigger and more grandly decorated than the Queen's dining room. So it's a little bit confusing, but because of an unaliving attempt from one of the other staff members, which seems to have been quietly swept under the rug, which is a little bit concerning, Burrell is quickly promoted to be one of the Queen's footmen. So he gets a really interesting job of mostly just like taking care of the corgis and like getting the Queen drinks and stuff like that. But what I find most fascinating is Burrell's description of the Queen's media intake. It became a familiar sight to watch the Queen standing at the sideboard, waiting for the electric kettle to boil so that she could brew herself some tea in a silver teapot. She sat down and scanned the British newspapers, laid out in required order in a neat, flat file that showed each masthead. From the bottom, the Times, the Daily Telegraph, the Daily Express, the Daily Mail, and the Daily Mirror, with the full front of a folded Sporting Life horse racing paper on top. Her favorite magazines were Harper's and Queen, Tatler, and Horse and Hound. She never read the Sun or the Daily Star, but was always informed of every royal story, thanks to a detailed summary compiled each morning by the press office and laid out next to the newspapers. Okay, and now we get to the cult aspect. This is like information control, right? Staff that lay out these newspapers are not offering any other perspectives on the outside world that are not found in these British tabloids. No outside journalism, no opinion pieces from anti-monarchists. This is purely controlling the information that royal family members see, which can lead to a lot of manipulation if you think about it. Stay tuned because 1, we're going to see that the royal family is full of assholes, and 2, Princess Diana is coming. Part 2 of the book the royal family doesn't like, apparently. We're going to meet Diana, but we're also going to meet the rest of the family. Although Burrell says that he loves the Queen, he thinks that she was a lovely, respectful woman, he does point out a reason why the monarchy is bad, actually, accidentally, I think, which is that it makes the royal family assholes. One evening, she was alone for dinner at Buckingham Palace, and I served her a darn of fish. She frowned, bounced the back of a fork off it, then looked at me forlornly. "What am I supposed to do with that?" she said. "I will take it back to the kitchen, Your Majesty, and have it replaced." No, don't do that. Somebody might get into trouble." I mean, good for her, but like, she's in charge of this workplace, supposedly, so why not create a culture where people won't get in trouble for feeding you fish? But worse, we have Princess Margaret, who apparently was not very nice to the staff and was kind of a pain in the ass to work with. A stickler for rules, the princess could not tolerate a breach. Staff were not allowed to watch the royal television set. We had turned on the television to while away the hours in the hope that no one would know. The sound of Land Rovers on the gravel outside snapped us into action. We turned off the television and returned to our posts, but Princess Margaret suspected something. She walked up to the television, placed her hand on the back, felt the radiating warmth, and announced, "Lilibet, someone has been watching TV. Can you chill?" But finally, we meet Diana, or I should say Burrell meets Diana when she comes to visit Balmoral for the first time. Rumors start going around the palace that they're pretty sure Diana's the one that they're going to choose to be Charles's bride. So within the palace itself, the entire operation is very cloak and dagger, he describes it. They actually tell staff it's for Prince Andrew to choose as a gift for something. Thomas, who is responsible for the upkeep of the crown jewels in the jewel house at the Tower of London, had in fact brought ladies' rings, with strict instructions not to include rubies or emeralds. A selection of diamonds and sapphires was set on a tray for, oddly, the Queen's perusal. Once the monarch had made her choice, the Prince of Wales gave his approval. Lady Diana was third in line to offer her opinion. The bride-to-be accepted the selection that had effectively been made for her because she did not want to appear rude and ungrateful. As she later told me, "I would never have chosen something quite so gaudy. If I had the chance again, it would be more elegant and simple." Everything about how this is handled from an outsider's perspective is bonkers. Like, why not even give Diana like this minor autonomy about like what ring she can choose? Like, they just never approach it with a helping the newcomer in sort of attitude. It's always a, how can we control this new person? And we'll see this over and over again. There's always this sense of whenever staff or a family member comes into the family, it's all about the control first and foremost, which is culty. It's very cult-like. But the day comes where they have to announce this engagement to the world. Staff still don't really know what's going on. They're just having tea as normal, but the Prince of Wales and Lady Diana are going to be there. So people are like, yeah, I think something's going on. He then notices that there are banks of TV cameras, boom microphones, reporters, and photographers all ready for this big engagement announcement that's been choreographed through PR and all that stuff. Unfortunately for Paul Burrell, he's asked to go walk the dogs at this like historic moment because no one gives a fuck about him. The staff see Diana looking kind of alone and sad and decide to go to McDonald's to get her a Big Mac. They apparently bring it to her and she seems pretty happy that somebody's thinking about her. And a staff member says, "You see, she's one of us." Lady Diana had a lonely time in those months leading up to the wedding. She dared not go outside because of the intense media spotlight. It must have been like moving into a town hall. Buckingham Palace is a disorienting maze for a stranger, a labyrinth of connecting corridors and rooms. No one showed her around, and instruction books and maps were not provided. A wrong turn down a corridor could lead to a cocktail party or an official reception. No one knew who or what was around the next corner. It is not a comfortable or easy place for any newcomer, from those marrying into the family down to punctilious staff. In staff quarters, at least there was a camaraderie, banter, and a mini community, which made life more bearable. Lady Diana did not have the same support network to depend on. She would sit up late, writing letters to her friends. Also, when the prince was away, she plucked up the courage to build up communication with the queen. Once a week, the phone rang on the queen's corridor. "Will the queen be dining alone today?" she'd ask, in a quiet, almost timid voice. Not once did she refuse, but Lady Diana was uncomfortable that to communicate with her future mother-in-law, she had to go through pages or footmen. It was a hurdle to her spontaneity, and the meal times were formal. She made the effort once a week, but preferred a quick dinner in her room, where she could curl up and relax. I think it really speaks to how not normal the royal family is, that they don't really grasp that the life that they live is not normal. It's so formal, it's so choreographed, it's so unspontaneous that they don't understand that most people's lives are not like that, and she's just been dropped into this world with like no survival guide, no orientation, no nothing at all to sort of make sense of how she's supposed to like build relationships and build community in this whole system. We hear a lot about all of the friendships that Diana made downstairs and how she got to know people, but a lot of people downstairs didn't like that. Despite having allies in the engine room of royal life, Lady Diana did not win universal approval. Among the servants, there were certain grandees and sticklers for tradition. Some long-serving members of staff frowned at the sight of this young lady intruding into their world. It was a strongly held opinion in certain quarters that she should know her place and remain upstairs. One woman, who had been in the household for 40 years, could not believe the audacity when Lady Diana opened cupboards and helped herself to biscuits. It was the height of bad manners, said the indignant woman. One chef even confronted her when she walked into the kitchen. You shouldn't be down here in the kitchen, he told her pointedly. Lady Diana, so used to friendliness downstairs, turned on her heels and ran upstairs. Again, the whole mystique of the royal family thing like just falls completely apart, right? If all of these people believe in this whole royal family mythos, like, then Diana is going to be royalty. Like, whatever she says goes, right? Like, this is this fantasy that we have that, you know, the royal family, they can just do whatever they want, live however they want to live. And we have people that are supposedly lower class or lower in the hierarchy that are willing to pass judgment on this, even though by their own logic, Diana should be allowed to do whatever she wants. So it's, again, the whole cult doesn't make sense. There's all these extra rules that they believe in the conditioning that aren't actually expressed to the general public. The staff got to watch the royal wedding on television like everybody else. I guess they couldn't even invite them to their own goddamn wedding. But he says that the queen wouldn't mind. Last thing I want to highlight is that this is probably the best Prince Charles PR that he didn't ask for. I'm almost stunned that they didn't want this book to come to light, because this is probably the best that Charles will ever come off in any book. And I have read royal biographies that he has had a hand in. Her true opinion's been taken down in later life with the benefit of hindsight, and not in 1992 when she made an emotional cry for help. The world would have had a different picture of the foundations of the marriage. True love, for that was what it was on both sides, survived a difficult adjustment in the early years, and far from rejecting the princess, Prince Charles did his best to understand his wife and be patient with the mood swings brought on by the eating disorder bulimia, which she later admitted to suffering from. Indeed, the love the princess had for her husband never fully disappeared. But it was a classic case of acting with haste and repenting at leisure. After the book's publication, hindsight taught her that her desperation to be heard had given a misleading impression of Prince Charles, and the book had painted over the good times. In giving an angry snapshot, she had made a mistake, she later acknowledged. And we get 2 excerpts from letters between Princess Diana and one of her friends, which I feel is one of the things that he got in trouble for taking from the palace. Stay tuned! Hello, we are looking at Buckingham Palace working conditions in the 70s, 80s, and 90s for the royal servants. Something the palace doesn't want you to think about, so that's why I'm inviting you to think about it. Now, this is partially a test because this video right here that I've uploaded just doesn't seem to want to actually go out to the public. I don't know why, so this is partially testing out to see if any of my videos will go through. So we're just going to keep jumping ahead in the book. The description of Burrell's bosses is really interesting. So he first describes the queen. He says that she is deeply religious, which is interesting because I read another royal biography that bragged that we don't know anything about the religiosity of the queen, but we definitely do. We know that she was very deeply religious. We know that she was always going to church, always doing things for the church, talking about the Church of England. She took that part of the role very seriously. She only places £5 in the collection bucket though, so I don't know what that says. He also notes that her relationship with Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, was genuine and somehow it all worked. They just were a really good team together. But that also means that they adhere to very strict gender roles. And Burrell notes that this means that Prince Philip was the true head of the family. He was the head of the household. So from a familial perspective, Prince Philip had a deeply impactful role on the growing up of like Prince Charles, for example. This unfortunately means that we also know where the Windsor rage comes from, because it describes Prince Philip as having a legendary temper with the staff. It says, quote, which reduced some valets and pages to tears. A hostile work environment if I ever saw it. Saying things like, quote, you are all bloody idiots, or it's all a load of bollocks. Just shouting at staff. Aren't the royal family meant to be the model family? Aren't they supposed to be projecting through all their PR and stuff this idea of being these kind, benevolent people that are destined to rule over us, that because of their amazing qualities? But this is how they're really acting behind the scenes to workers? I don't know. It just doesn't sit right with me. Funny, I know who these people are now because they're in the press. In the February of 1981, Maria had been promoted as housemaid to the Duke of Edinburgh. She was keen to join the princess, but Lady Susan Hussey, the Queen's lady-in-waiting, learned of the approach. Maria was given no choice. She was told she could not leave the service of Prince Philip. So the princess recruited 2 other allies from downstairs for Kensington Palace. What a crazy work environment. Like, people are literally scolding you and saying you have no choice where you can work, and just acting really rude and condescending to you at all times. It just baffling to me. And also, Lady Susan Hussey, we now know, is just an asshole to deal with as well. Honestly, to me, this is a workers' rights issue at this point. Like, this is not an environment that is sustainable for good workplace culture. And forgive me, if these people are going to be your head of state, if they are going to operate as your head of state family, then they've got to be complying with, just basic human decency in the workplace. They got to be a role model of that. This ain't it. Part whatever the hell this is of A Royal Duty by Paul Burrell, in which the firm capitalizes on its staff members' marriage for purely PR purposes. So Burrell is going to marry his wife Maria, who he met on the job. And as soon as it's announced, all of the PR arms of the royal family start covering the story. We even have a News of the World reporter break into Maria's family home. What part of the contract that you sign with the royal family makes it so that you are forced to participate in the marketing of the royal family with your own wedding to the point where there are reporters breaking into your house? That doesn't seem reasonable from an employee-employer perspective, but I don't know. It's a little bit unclear, but Burrell says that he has to be confirmed in the Church of England, despite the fact that Maria and their future children will be Roman Catholics. I don't know if this has to do with his job within the royal household and being part of the Church of England, but they just kind of skip over that. When he tells the Queen about this upcoming marriage, he says, quote, it's such a shame that she will have to leave the service, I said to the Queen. Oh, why's that? She inquired. I couldn't believe she was unaware of an unwritten rule that had been upheld for hundreds of years. Seems to be an ongoing theme within the royal family that there are all of these quote-unquote protocols that they have to follow that they don't even know about. And yet supposedly they're the rulers of this institution. Is there nothing that can be done about that? Well, with all due respect, Your Majesty, you are the Queen, I said. A word in the right ear obviously worked. A letter from the master of the household arrived to tell us that Maria would not have to leave service because the Queen had intervened and the rule was being relaxed. Thanks, but you shouldn't have to ask your employer whether or not you can marry someone and make sure that, they don't lose their job over it. Thanks. Another receipt showing that Princess Diana was trying to be really understanding with Charles feeling left out or feeling like he wasn't in the spotlight as much. Then we get to Burrell and Maria having their first child, which is also used as an excuse for PR for the royal family. In the Sunday Mirror with, quote, Maria's royal baby. But of course the palace is a shitty work environment, so as soon as he brings the baby to see the queen, one other staff member snipes, quote, he could have worn a tie. Everyone in the royal household is competing to see who can be the biggest asshole, I swear. So Maria is starting to get closer to Princess Diana, who wants to recruit her and Paul into her sort of side of the royal household. We also get another royal wedding, the wedding between Andrew and Fergie. Burrell notes that the downstairs staff didn't really like Andrew or Fergie very much because they threw, quote, lavish sort of parties and 5-course dinners all the time, which is exhausting for them. But they're still total assholes to her because when she tries to thank the queen for giving her a new royal title when they get married, she's called, quote, vulgar. And the gray suits work overtime to spin this story about how Ferguson doesn't understand all these protocols. She didn't really get that title. It was actually just the queen giving it to Andrew and his wife. It has nothing to do with her. She's literally just trying to be nice. She's trying to thank the queen for giving her this title. Like, why are we twisting it in knots to make Sarah look like the villain of this story? But again, everybody is competing to be the biggest asshole. Even among the household staff, she couldn't win. From top to bottom in the royal household of Buckingham Palace, the Duchess was poorly treated. It was determined to freeze her out. A passing member of staff said, quote, what does that fucking redheaded mayor want? Again, the monarchy just breaks down totally. If you're a staff member at Buckingham Palace, you're supposed to believe that these people are inherently better than you, touched by the divine. She is royalty now, and they're willing to call her a fucking redheaded mayor behind her back? How does this system make any sense? Maria continues to talk to Paul about taking up an offer with Diana's team. But the hierarchy of the business is difficult for Burrell to, give up. He says, quote, I had a duty to the queen. She was number one, and I couldn't contemplate working for number two. It was, I thought, a backward career move. Besides, I was a footman and had no idea about running an entire household as a butler. Maria, why would I give up the best job in the world? I asked her. For your family, that's why, she said. That is the one problem with royal duty. Its hours and the dedication required get in the way of duty to your loved ones. I think it's pretty obvious that this is not a healthy work environment where you feel like you have to put your work before all of your personal obligations and your family and, your personal life. He decides to follow what his wife is telling him. But as soon as he starts saying that he's considering this career move, people are calling him crazy for wanting to leave the queen. Then we get some more description of Lady Susan Hussey, who's already come up in the book before. Now, Burrell says that he actually liked Lady Susan Hussey, but she doesn't sound very great either. I don't know why he has such an affinity for her. But she comes to him and she asks, quote, do you think it was the right decision to make? I don't know if you are aware, but everything isn't quite what it seems in the household where you are moving. Lady Susan was at her discreet best, but the downstairs gossip was already awash with talks of, quote, difficulties within the Wales's marriage. Lady Susan was well informed about the state of the royal marriage. She had long been a trusted confidant of the Prince of Wales, and her intelligence was the best there could have been. All I could do was reiterate the family reasons for moving out to the countryside. I told Lady Susan how difficult a decision it had been, but there could be no going back. She had spoken up and of genuine concern, reminded me how fond the Queen was of me, and wished me all the best for the future. It's very intriguing that Lady Hussey had this sort of insider information that the Wales marriage was on the rocks, when it seems like Paul and a lot of the staff didn't really get that impression at all from working one-on-one with, Diana and Charles. So it was being treated as a secret within the institution itself, which is very interesting. Like, we understand why there was such a secrecy from the outside world about, the breakdown of Diana and Charles's marriage, but inside as well, they're trying to keep it so hush-hush. They don't want to break the illusion within their own staff. I didn't need to run that fast for the princess or for the monarch, but everyone in the household staff knew how exacting Prince Charles could be. Even the princess knew how demanding her husband was and how high his standards were. That was why she enjoyed making fun of me rushing at his beck and call, and especially when I had to go out on the rooftop in all weathers to raise his standard. His flag had to fly when he was in residence. The Queen had a flag sergeant for this job, but at Highgrove, it was my task. I had 1,000,001 other duties, but the prince insisted. When word was telephoned, though, that he would be 5 minutes away, the rooftop circus routine began. I climbed into the dark attic via the ceiling hatch on the nursery landing, then squeezed on my knees through another hatch that led out to the gray-tiled sloping roof. A wooden gantry with a handrail to one side ran along the curved ridge for me to walk on. For gantry, read plank. For walk, read dice with death. In gale force winds and driving rain, that white flagpole became my stabilizer. I waited and hung on for the car or helicopter to come into view before I had the flag up and fluttering. I don't think this isn't a butler's roles and responsibilities, but they act like they can just ask any staff member to do any job, no matter how bizarre or dangerous it is. And they know they can get away with asking people to do things that are not their job, because they know they're not going to suffer any consequences for it. Even if Burrell did fall off that roof, he would just be rushed to the hospital and nobody would have any record of it, apparently, based on previous things we saw in the book. Stay tuned, because this is just a small glimpse into how Prince Charles treats the staff. Welcome back to Prince Charles is a horrible boss, and now he's king. Or A Royal Duty by Paul Burrell. The last time we left Paul, we learned that he has to do the dangerous job of raising the flag whenever Charles comes to town. But we also learn about a time that the Queen Mum came to visit Highgrove. So darling Granny comes to visit, and she's served salmon sandwiches. But apparently the Queen Mum didn't like salmon sandwiches, God forbid. So basically she didn't eat anything. And when the Queen Mum left, he says that Prince Charles was, quote, visibly moved. I don't know what I would do without her, he said, as the car disappeared down the drive, its wheels kicking up dust. He stood there waving his handkerchief until she had disappeared out of view, and then we turned and went back inside. Then the mood changed, from reflection to reproof. I had turned into the hallway after closing the front doors behind me. Such a pity that tea was ruined, said the prince. It seemed that the Queen Mother's staff at Clarence House, William Talon the palace steward and Reginald Wilcox the page, should have been consulted. Next time, would you please ring William or Reg and find out what Queen Elizabeth likes instead of guessing, he added. This man would probably get fired if he was like the middle management at a fucking McDonald's, but now he's the head of state, apparently. Staff always knew that the prince was the man who paid the wages. Good wages. The Wales' staff were the best paid in the royal service. The switch from the monarch to heir to the throne brought a £10,000 increase, taking my annual salary from around £8,000 a year to £18,000 a year. For a hike, the treadmill went faster. Why does working for the heir to the throne, why does that get you an increase in pay? How does that make any sense? There was no wine butler to decant the bottles of port and claret, no under butlers to clean the silver or wash the dishes, no footmen to greet guests, take their coats or fetch logs for the fire, no florist to arrange flowers for the table, no one to run to the roof to raise the standard, no one to do the shopping. All of a sudden, it was down to one butler. Yeah, that's an increase in a lot of responsibilities, and it's very odd that the royal family is willing to fork out all of that money to pay for tons and tons of staff at Buckingham Palace, but not for the heir to the throne. The math ain't mathin'. Something is going on here. Prince Charles also apparently writes a lot of passive-aggressive post-it notes to remind staff to do things his way. They call them memos, but they're basically just post-it notes from your shitty roommate. Did someone pick up the seeds for the garden? Is there a bottle bank in Tetbury? Can you get someone to look at my telephone? Could the china dish be mended, please? A letter from the Queen must have fallen by accident into the wastepaper basket beside the table in the library. Please look for it. And then we get to the sketch. Asking employees to do sketchy, untransparent things. So Burrell notes that there's like a diary that staff use that's left in the butler's pantry to record like the ins and outs and comings and goings of guests from Highgrove. He said it wasn't a secret or anything. It was in the butler's pantry for everybody to look at and use, and they would just write down who was there for certain meal times. So he gives the example of like Emma Thompson and Kenneth Branagh for lunch, Jimmy Savile for lunch, which that's a little bit concerning. And so he would write down when Camilla Parker Bowles was showing up to Highgrove. Out of the blue one day in August 1988, 3 months before Prince Charles's 40th birthday party, the red disc dropped into the box under the label library, and I went to see what he wanted. Paul, can you tell me how the princess knows who exactly has visited Highgrove this week? It made no sense to me. I had not mentioned a word to the princess. I was confused. I'm sorry, Your Royal Highness, I don't understand. And at that moment, I truly didn't. I didn't think of the times the princess had joined me in the butler's pantry for a sly read of a newspaper, a snatched gossip over a mug of coffee, or at the kitchen sink where I washed, she dried. It hadn't dawned on me when I came in from the main house and found her waiting for me in the pantry. The princess has been a familiar face in staff areas since her days at the Buckingham Palace. I didn't know how cunning she could be. Not then. As the prince grilled me, suspected me, and asked me to think, the penny dropped like a lead weight on my foot. Well, I do keep a record of the lunch guests, Your Royal Highness, I said meekly. Why? We both knew what had happened then. Why do you write down names in your diary? He demanded. You're a government department. Shouldn't we know who you are eating lunch with? You're the head of state. Shouldn't we know who you're talking to? Who you're eating with? And the thing you were concerned about was that your wife had discovered your affair. Absolutely wild. From that point forward, no names were required to be written down in the butler's pantry diary. They also started recording private on countless days in the spring of 1989 to remind them that Prince Charles was staying at a private residence where only 3 people would know where he was, including this Michael Fawcett character, who I'm starting to believe is a pretty interesting figure. We should dive deep into that. Who is Prince Charles, really? This book is going somewhere.